Deep Dive, the IrAero story, Russian aviation, fleet history, and Flight 103.
Join us for a comprehensive deep dive into IrAero, the Russian airline bridging the frozen landscapes of Siberia with tropical destinations across Asia. In this exploration, we unpack the airline's fascinating 27-year history since its 1999 founding in Irkutsk. We analyze their complex fleet evolution from Soviet-era Antonov An-24s to the Sukhoi Superjet 100 and the highly anticipated Yakovlev MC-21-300. We also examine their extensive 60-destination route map, the implications of being banned in the European Union, and the miraculous survival story of Flight 103 in Blagoveshchensk. Perfect for aviation enthusiasts and curious minds alike, this deep dive extracts the most important insights to keep you well informed on the economics, mechanics, and logistics of extreme regional aviation.
IrAero, Russian Airlines, Aviation History, Sukhoi Superjet 100, Yakovlev MC-21, Flight 103 accident, Antonov An-24, Irkutsk Aviation, Regional Airlines, EU airline ban, Siberian Aviation, Aircraft Fleet Management.
So picture the absolute physical limit of a commercial aircraft.
Okay.
You step out onto a windswept airport tarmac, and you are just wrapped in the thickest layers you own. The air is so unimaginably cold. We're talking -40, maybe -50 degrees Celsius.
Where it literally hurts to breathe.
Exactly. The moisture in your breath practically crystallizes before it even drifts away. The machinery around you is just, groaning under the thermal stress.
Yeah, metal doesn't like that kind of cold.
It really doesn't. But you board a passenger jet, you settle into your seat, and you brace yourself against this deep Siberian winter. Then the aircraft takes off.
Right.
Just a few hours later, the landing gear drops, the cabin doors open, and you are immediately enveloped in this suffocatingly thick, humid wave of tropical heat.
It's a complete shock to the system.
Total shock. You step off the plane into a 95-degree afternoon in Vietnam or the Philippines. It is this intense geographic whiplash that fundamentally tests the limits of aerospace engineering.
It's a brutal transition. When an airframe goes from an environment where metal contracts and synthetic rubber becomes brittle to an environment of extreme heat and high salinity humidity.
You're not just flying passengers anymore.
No, you aren't. You are basically conducting a high-stakes physics experiment on the integrity of the aircraft itself.
Wow.
The thermal expansion, the condensation buildup in the avionics bays, the sheer stress on the environmental control systems. I mean, it requires an operational model that most legacy carriers in temperate climates simply never have to consider.
Well, welcome to the deep dive. Today we're pointing our compass toward Irkutsk, Russia, to look at a truly fascinating carrier, IrAero.
IrAero.
We are going to deconstruct the operational realities of an airline that manages these exact extremes. We have a mountain of operational data to get through today.
It's dense material.
It is. We're pulling from a dense encyclopedic entry detailing their global route network, their highly unorthodox fleet history, their strategic pivots, and a dramatic runway overrun back in 2011 that tested their safety protocols to the absolute breaking point.
We have the hard data, the fleet numbers, the destination coordinates, the historical timelines.
Right.
But the objective here, for you listening, is to read the negative space in that data. We need to look at what isn't explicitly stated to really understand the economic and logistical tightrope this airline is walking.
Okay, let's unpack this. Where exactly does the IrAero story begin, and how do they fit into the broader landscape of global aviation?
So, the foundation was poured back in 1999. IrAero was established in Irkutsk,
which is a major industrial and administrative center in Siberia, right?
Yes, situated right near Lake Baikal. Now, to understand 1999 in this context, you have to look at the macro environment.
The post-Soviet era.
Exactly. The massive, centralized, state-run aviation apparatus of the Soviet era had fractured throughout the 1990s. Out of that fragmentation, hundreds of smaller, independent regional carriers popped up.
Trying to fill the void.
Trying to absorb the demand for connectivity across literally the largest landmass on Earth. Now, most of them didn't survive the decade.
But IrAero did.
IrAero did.
Yeah.
And they survived by building a highly utilitarian, multifaceted business model. The sources show they run scheduled domestic passenger services, scheduled international flights, charter operations, and dedicated cargo flights.
Wait, running scheduled international routes alongside ad hoc cargo and charters?
Yeah.
That sounds like 3 completely different companies operating under one roof. I mean, most modern airlines hyper-focus on one model to keep costs down. How do they justify splitting their focus like that?
Because in a geography as isolated and vast as Siberia, hyper-focusing is a luxury you just cannot afford. The economic demands of the region require absolute elasticity. Well, you have sprawling mining operations, energy extraction sites, isolated communities that rely on aviation as their absolute only lifeline when the roads freeze over, or when they turn to mud in the spring.
So they have to be ready for anything.
Right. You have to be able to fly a corporate charter to a natural gas field on a Tuesday, move a cabin full of tourists to the capital on Wednesday, and then haul heavy machinery parts on Thursday.
If you only fly scheduled passenger routes, you leave money on the table.
Too much money, especially in a market with very thin margins.
So they are a logistical Swiss Army knife.
That's a great way to put it.
That brings us to their physical footprint. Their absolute core base is Irkutsk Airport. We even have the physical address for their headquarters from the sources, Sovietskaya Street 139A in Irkutsk.
Right in the heart of it.
But having one headquarters in a country that spans 11 time zones doesn't work. The operational data outlines 3 specific secondary hubs: Moscow, Domodedovo, Magadan, and Yakutsk.
Domodedovo makes perfect sense.
Yeah, it's a primary gateway into the Russian capital. You need that economic tether. But Magadan and Yakutsk, those are choices born out of absolute necessity, not convenience.
They are some of the most logistically hostile environments on the planet. Yakutsk is widely cited as one of the coldest major cities on Earth. It is built entirely on continuous permafrost.
And Magadan.
Similarly brutal. It's situated on the Sea of Yakutsk, highly prone to extreme weather systems and just crippling isolation. Operating a secondary hub out of these locations means you aren't just flying planes there.
You're basing them there.
Exactly. Basing aircraft, maintenance crews, and physical infrastructure in those conditions.
Let's drill down into what that physically looks like. An aircraft can't just sit on the tarmac overnight in Yakutsk the way it does in Atlanta or London. If the temperature drops to negative 45 degrees Celsius, what is actually happening to that plane?
Okay, so the first major issue is the fuel itself.
The jet fuel freezes.
It can. Standard commercial jet fuel, Jet A1, has a freezing point of around negative 47 degrees Celsius. In Yakutsk, ambient temperatures can approach or even breach that limit.
That's terrifying.
The fuel starts to wax. It thickens up, which can clog the fuel lines and the filters, completely starving the engines. So you are dealing with specialized fuel additives or constant external heating.
Just to keep the gas liquid.
Right. Then you have the hydraulic fluids. Those operate the landing gear, the flaps, the rudder. At those extreme negative temperatures, the seals shrink and the fluid viscosity changes.
Making the flight controls sluggish.
Sluggish or completely unresponsive.
So you have a multi-million-dollar piece of machinery that is essentially turning into a solid block of ice on the ramp. How do the ground crews even service it? I mean, you can't just plug in a space heater.
Well, actually, you sort of do. It requires an incredible amount of ground support equipment. They use these massive, specialized mobile heaters with thick, insulated hoses.
Like giant hair dryers.
Pretty much. They pump hot air directly into the engine cowlings, the avionics bays, and the cabin just to keep the internal components within operational tolerances while the plane is parked.
And the ground crews?
They're working in short, highly regulated shifts just to prevent frostbite. De-icing procedures take significantly longer and require entirely different chemical mixtures than what you'd see in a temperate winter.
So the fact that IrAero maintains these as secondary hubs indicates they have institutionalized this extreme cold weather operational knowledge.
Exactly. It's a massive barrier to entry for any competitor.
Which makes their broader destination map feel completely surreal. They have this deep institutional knowledge of surviving permafrost, yet they serve a network of 60 highly varied destinations. Let's look at the international spread.
It's quite the list.
We have Baku in Azerbaijan. We have a massive footprint in China. Places like Beijing, Daxing, Harbin, Manzhouli, and Sanya. They operate into Ulaanbaatar in Mongolia.
Now, the routes into Harbin and Manzhouli are highly logical.
Right, border cities.
Yeah, facilitating northern trade and regional transit. It's a natural extension of their domestic utility model. But Sanya changes the equation entirely.
How so?
Sanya is located on Hainan Island in the southernmost province of China. It is a purely tropical tourist destination, heavily reliant on the leisure market.
And it goes even further south from there. They operate routes into Calibo in the Philippines.
The gateway to Boracay.
Exactly. Famous for its white sand beaches, resorts, and intense humidity. They're flying deep into Vietnam as well. Hanoi, Nha Trang, and Phu Quoc. Again, Phu Quoc and Nha Trang are massive, sun-drenched holiday spots.
And over in Turkey, they serve Istanbul and the resort city of Antalya.
Right.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it reveals a bipolar business strategy. Domestically, they are the rugged lifeline moving workers and freight across the frozen tundra. Internationally, they are almost exclusively a leisure carrier.
Funneling people from the harsh northern climates directly to the Mediterranean and the tropics.
Yeah.
But hold on. Running a fleet from Yakutsk to Fukuok isn't just a fun geographic fact.
Right.
What does that thermal cycle actually do to the airframe? We talked about metal contracting in the cold.
Right.
When you land that same freezing plane in a 95-degree, 90% humidity environment a few hours later, what happens?
Condensation becomes your primary enemy. When a cold-soaked aircraft descends to a hot, humid environment, moisture rapidly condenses on every single chilled surface, inside and outside the aircraft.
It just sweats.
We call it aircraft rain. Water can pool in the belly of the fuselage, which promotes rapid corrosion. It can drip onto critical electronic components in the avionics bay, causing shorts.
That sounds like a maintenance nightmare.
It is. The thermal expansion also puts microscopic stress on the airframe joints and the rivets. Managing an aircraft that operates across a 90°C temperature differential requires an incredibly aggressive, preemptive maintenance schedule.
To inspect for corrosion and structural fatigue, that sounds incredibly expensive. You are essentially paying an operational tax for the geography you fly in, but there is a massive glaring omission on this route map that we need to talk about.
The western border.
Right. They fly heavily into Asia, Southeast Asia, the Middle East, and Turkey. But they don't fly an inch further west. There are 0 destinations in Western Europe.
That brings us to a critical geopolitical and operational constraint detailed in the data. IrAero is explicitly categorized under airlines banned from operating within the European Union.
Now, to be absolutely clear to you listening, our objective here is purely analytical. We strictly report this fact from the source without taking political sides or adding outside commentary. We are just examining the structural and logistical reality of what this means for an airline.
And from an operational standpoint, being locked out of European airspace is arguably one of the most severe constraints a global carrier can face.
Because Europe is such a massive market.
It's one of the most lucrative, high-yield, and densely populated aviation markets in the world. When an airline is banned from the EU, they don't just lose landing rights in Paris or Frankfurt.
They lose the airspace itself.
They lose the right to fly through European skies. This forces catastrophic inefficiencies onto any Western-facing route. If you want to fly to North Africa or the Americas, you have to route hundreds or thousands of miles out of the way just to avoid the airspace.
Burning massive amounts of extra fuel.
And completely destroying the economic viability of the route.
So this route map we're looking at isn't just a reflection of where people in Irkutsk want to go on vacation. It's a reflection of where the airline is legally permitted to fly efficiently.
Precisely. They encountered an immovable barrier to the west, so the corporate strategy pivoted entirely to the east and south. It highlights the absolute necessity of adaptability.
When you lose access to a continent, you double down on the markets that remain open to you.
Which perfectly explains the heavy presence in Chinese, Vietnamese, and Turkish airspace. They essentially rebuilt their revenue models around Asian and Middle Eastern leisure and trade corridors.
But to service those corridors, to maintain 60 global destinations while dealing with extreme weather and massive geographic detours, you need a highly capable fleet.
You do.
And this is where the data presents us with a massive, head-scratching paradox. I love this part.
The fleet mathematics in this operational dossier are highly irregular, and they point to severe underlying pressures within the company.
Let's walk through the numbers together. Right at the top, the official info box explicitly lists IrAero's fleet size as 32 aircraft.
Okay.
That number tracks logically. If you have 60 destinations scattered from Moscow to the Philippines, 32 planes seems like a reasonable, functional fleet to maintain that network.
It makes sense on paper.
But then you look at the granular breakdown of the active current fleet, dated August 2025. You count the planes actually in service, and the number drops to 9 active planes.
It is a delta of 23 aircraft. 32 on paper, 9 on the tarmac. What's fascinating here is how this discrepancy exposes the hidden mechanics of airline asset management.
Because you don't just misplace 23 commercial jets.
Highly improbable. The difference between registered fleet and active fleet tells a story of grounded assets, deferred maintenance, and strategic hibernation.
Let's put ourselves in the shoes of their chief operating officer. If I'm staring at a spreadsheet that says I own 32 planes, but my dispatchers are telling me only 9 are airworthy this morning, where are the other 23? Are they just parked out back under a tarp?
Some of them quite literally might be. Look, in commercial aviation, an aircraft requires relentless, mandated maintenance schedules to remain airworthy. The most intense of these are C-checks and D-checks.
Tell me about a D-check.
A D-check is a heavy maintenance visit that occurs every 6 to 10 years. It involves virtually tearing the airplane down to its bare metal hull.
Wow.
They remove the interior, the seats, the galley, the lavatories. They use X-ray and ultrasound equipment to inspect the airframe for microscopic stress fractures.
The exact kind of fractures caused by the thermal expansion we discussed earlier.
Exactly. It takes tens of thousands of man-hours and can keep an aircraft out of service for up to 2 months.
If you even have the resources to do it.
Right. If an airline is facing cash flow issues, or if they simply lack the hangar space and certified mechanics, they might defer these checks. And once an aircraft hits its flight hour or calendar limit for a mandatory check, it legally cannot fly. It is grounded.
But wait, could this also be tied to supply chain issues? Because if you have a mixed fleet and you are operating under international bans, getting spare parts has to be a nightmare.
That is the most probable accelerant for this discrepancy. The global aviation supply chain is incredibly fragile. If an airline cannot legally or logistically procure a replacement landing gear actuator, an avionics computer, or even specialized engine fan blades,
The plane doesn't fly.
that aircraft is grounded. And when supply chains dry up, airlines often resort to a practice known as cannibalization.
Which is exactly what it sounds like, right? Stripping a perfectly good but slightly broken plane to keep another one flying.
Yes, you park one aircraft and use it as an unregulated warehouse for spare parts to keep your remaining active fleet in the air.
That's wild.
Over time, that parked aircraft is stripped so bare that returning it to service becomes economically impossible. Now, the data doesn't explicitly state that IrAero is cannibalizing its fleet.
But the math is suspicious.
Operating 9 active planes out of a registered 32 is a classic statistical footprint of an airline struggling with heavy maintenance bottlenecks and parts procurement.
It makes those 9 active planes look like absolute marathon runners. They are carrying the weight of the entire 60-destination network.
They really are.
Let's look at the actual composition of those 9 active planes, because it is a bizarre mix of aerospace engineering.
The active fleet profile is heavily fragmented, which introduces another layer of operational friction.
First on the list, they operate exactly one Airbus A319-100. It has a capacity of 156 passengers. But why on earth would an airline keep exactly one Airbus in its active fleet? If you are struggling with parts and maintenance, keeping a fleet of one seems like corporate masochism.
It does.
You need a dedicated pool of pilots rated specifically for the A319, you need Airbus-certified mechanics, and you need a completely separate supply chain for Airbus parts just for a single jet.
It violates almost every rule of modern fleet commonality. Airlines fly a single aircraft type specifically to avoid the exact headache you just described. If you have all Boeing 737s, every pilot can fly every plane.
And every mechanic can fix every engine.
Right. Operating a single A319 suggests they are keeping it active out of sheer necessity for a specific operational profile.
Like what?
Well, the A319 is a capable medium-haul, narrow-body jet. It can fly further and carry more passengers than anything else currently active in their fleet.
Right.
They likely have 1 or 2 specific, high-density, longer-range routes.
Like into Turkey or Moscow.
Perhaps, where their smaller regional jets simply cannot meet the passenger volume or the range requirements. They endure the logistical nightmare of the fleet of one because the revenue on those specific routes demands it.
That makes sense. It's the only heavy lifter they have left. Moving down the list, we hit the Bombardier CRJ200LR. Again, they only have exactly one in active service. This is a Canadian-built regional jet capacity of 50 passengers.
The CRJ200 is a very different machine. It is designed for short, thin routes, 50 passengers. It's the kind of aircraft you use to connect a remote Siberian mining town to the primary hub in Irkutsk.
But it has limitations, right?
Extreme payload and range limitations, especially in harsh weather. If you're operating a fully loaded CRJ200 out of a short runway in freezing conditions, you are constantly fighting weight limits.
So keeping just one active means what?
It suggests they are either phasing it out or keeping it barely operational for a highly specific, low-density subsidized regional route.
But then we get to the core. The absolute workhorse of the IrAero operation right now. 7 Sukhoi Superjet 100s. These make up the vast majority of their active revenue-generating fleet.
The Sukhoi Superjet 100, or SSJ-100, is a highly significant aircraft. It represents a massive push for domestic Russian aerospace independence.
It was designed in the 2000s, right?
Yes, meant to aggressively compete globally with regional jets produced by IrAero in Brazil or Bombardier in Canada. For IrAero, pivoting to a fleet heavily reliant on the Sukhoi is a strategic alignment with domestic manufacturing.
Which insulates them from sanctions.
Theoretically, it insulates them slightly from international supply chain embargoes, though the early models of the CRJ200 still relied heavily on Western avionics and engine components.
The seating configuration on these Sukhois is what really caught my eye in the data. They hold 93 passengers, but they are configured with 12 business class seats and 81 economy class seats. Think about the math there.
It's heavily skewed.
Almost 13% of the entire cabin real estate on a small regional jet is dedicated to premium business class seating. Usually, on a regional hop, you're lucky to get a slightly larger seat up front, or the whole plane is just a single-class sardine can.
It is an unusually heavy premium configuration for a regional airframe, and it speaks directly to their customer base. You have to look at the demographics of who is flying out of places like Irkutsk, Yakutsk, and Magadan.
It's not just budget tourists.
Exactly. Siberia is the engine room of the Russian resource economy. You have major oil, natural gas, diamond, and precious metal extraction operations. The people flying these routes often include high-level corporate executives.
Government officials, too, probably.
Government officials overseeing regional infrastructure, specialized engineers. These are high-yield passengers whose companies are willing to pay a massive premium for flexibility and comfort in an otherwise punishing environment.
It's essentially a flying boardroom for the resource sector.
Precisely. And furthermore, when they deploy these Sukhois on those international leisure routes to places like Sanya or Antalya, those 12 business class seats cater to the wealthy demographic looking for premium vacation travel.
That makes total sense.
In an industry with razor-thin margins, those 12 seats might generate more profit than the other 81 economy seats combined.
So the active fleet is 1 European Airbus, 1 Canadian Bombardier, and 7 Russian Sukhois. It is a true patchwork. But to understand how they ended up with this skeleton crew of 9 active planes, we have to look at what they used to fly and what they are desperately waiting to fly in the future.
The former fleet data is incredibly revealing.
The historical fleet data reads like a corporate archaeology site. You can track the airline's changing ambitions layer by layer, the first layer being the retired Boeing wide-bodies.
Right.
They used to operate Boeing 777-200ERs. That is an absolute behemoth of an aircraft. It's a twin-engine, long-haul wide-body designed to fly hundreds of people across oceans. They also operated Boeing 737-800s, the classic narrow-body workhorse.
Retiring the 777-200ERs is a massive strategic retreat. Operating a wide-body aircraft changes the entire scale of your business.
How much more expensive is it?
The landing fees are astronomical, the fuel burn is immense, and you need to reliably fill 300 seats on every single flight to avoid hemorrhaging cash. Flying a 777 from Siberia to Moscow or a resort town is a high-risk, high-reward play.
So why divest?
The fact that they divested themselves of these aircraft indicates they likely couldn't sustain the passenger load factors required, or the maintenance and leasing costs became untenable. They decided to shrink back to a manageable regional footprint.
They shed the heavy wide bodies, but the most historically significant number in the retired column is the 19 Antonov aircraft, specifically An-24s, An-26s, and an An-140. For anyone familiar with aviation history, the An-24 is an absolute legend.
The Antonov An-24 is the quintessential Soviet-era rugged utility aircraft. It's a twin-engine turboprop designed in the late 1950s. It was built with a high wing configuration.
Meaning the wings sit above the fuselage?
Yes, which keeps the engines and the propellers high off the ground.
Which is incredibly important when you are landing on a runway made of packed dirt, gravel, or ice. You don't want your propellers sucking up rocks and destroying the engines.
Precisely. They were built for austere environments. They have incredibly robust landing gear designed to absorb massive shocks. They were the absolute backbone of regional connectivity in the Soviet Union and post-Soviet Russia for decades.
So having 19 of them was a big deal.
Operating 19 of them meant IrAero was deeply embedded in that rugged point-to-point unpaved runway network. But they are brutally loud, they vibrate intensely, they are not fuel-efficient by modern standards.
In the cockpits.
Their analog cockpits require a 3-person crew, a pilot, a co-pilot, and a flight engineer.
So moving from 19 Antonov turboprops to 7 Sukhoi Superjets is a complete generational leap. You are moving from 3-person analog cockpits to 2-person glass cockpits.
A massive shift.
You're moving from loud propellers to quiet turbofans. It completely changes your pilot training programs and your maintenance tooling.
It was a necessary modernization. But it brings us to the most critical bottleneck in IrAero's current operations.
They retired the massive Boeings. They retired the aging Antonovs. They are running their active network on just 9 planes. Why haven't they replaced the retired capacity?
That is the multi-million-dollar question.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The data contains an orders column. It shows exactly what the airline is banking its future on. They have a standing order for 10 Yakovlev MC-21-300s, and the data specifically notes that IrAero is the launch customer for this aircraft.
This is the linchpin of their entire corporate strategy. The Yakovlev MC-21-300 is not just another plane. It is a highly advanced, next-generation Russian narrow-body airliner.
Designed to compete with the big guys.
Yes, designed from the ground up to aggressively compete globally with the Airbus A319 and the Boeing 737X families. It features extensive use of composite materials for lighter weight, advanced aerodynamics, next-generation engines. It represents the absolute pinnacle of modern Russian civil aerospace ambition.
Being the launch customer sounds incredibly prestigious. But how does that actually play out in the boardroom? What does it mean for IrAero to be the first in line?
Being a launch customer is a high-stakes gamble. The manufacturer, Yakovlev, desperately needs a domestic airline to prove to the world that the aircraft works in commercial service.
So they offer incentives.
Massive financial incentives. Steep discounts on the purchase price, highly favorable financing terms, comprehensive maintenance support guarantees. For an airline like IrAero, it's a chance to acquire a billion-dollar state-of-the-art fleet at a fraction of the market cost.
But there is a catch.
The catch is that you are essentially commercial beta testers. No matter how many thousands of hours an aircraft spends in test flights, putting it into daily high-frequency commercial service will expose design flaws.
Software bugs, unexpected wear and tear.
Exactly. As the launch customer, you suffer through all the early dispatch reliability issues. You deal with the grounded flights and the angry passengers while the manufacturer works out the kinks.
But IrAero isn't even dealing with beta testing bugs yet, because they don't actually have the planes. The operational data drops an absolute bombshell of a footnote regarding this order.
Yes, it does.
It states that delivery of these 10 Yakovlev MC-21-300s was originally scheduled for 2019, but as of this current data set in August 2025, the delivery remains delayed.
This 6-year delay is the black hole at the center of IrAero's operational model. If we connect this to the bigger picture, an airline builds its entire multi-year strategic roadmap around fleet deliveries.
Because everything is timed perfectly.
Right. If you expect 10 next-generation aircraft in 2019, you start retiring your older, less efficient aircraft in 2018. You sell off your Boeings and your Antonovs to raise capital.
You train the pilots.
You hire and train pilots specifically for the MC-21 simulator. You plan massive route expansions, selling tickets for flights that only the new planes have the range and efficiency to operate profitably.
So when the manufacturer calls you in 2019 and says, sorry, they aren't ready, and then calls back in 2020, 2021, and all the way to 2025 with the exact same excuse, you are completely stranded.
You are financially and operationally marooned.
You've already retired the old fleet. You are paying pilots who have no planes to fly. How is this company not bankrupt? How do you physically cover 60 destinations with 9 planes without the engines literally falling off from overuse?
It requires an almost pathological level of schedule optimization. It means those 9 active aircraft, the Sukhois, the lone Airbus, the single CRJ200, are likely operating at absolute maximum utilization rates.
So no downtime.
Very little. They are flying tight turnaround times, operating late into the night, minimizing ground time.
Yeah.
It also explains the massive discrepancy between the 32 registered planes and the 9 active ones.
Oh, because they kept the old ones on paper.
Right. They likely wanted to retire many of those older planes, but the delay forced them to keep them on the books, perhaps occasionally cannibalizing them or putting them through desperate, expensive D-checks just to squeeze a few more flight hours out of them while they wait for the Yakovlevs.
It is a monumental test of corporate endurance. They are essentially treading water with lead weights attached to their ankles.
That's very accurate.
They are fighting the geography of Siberia, navigating around the closed airspace of Europe, and managing a massive fleet delay all at the exact same time. It paints a picture of an airline constantly managing slow-moving crises.
Day in and day out.
But sometimes in aviation, the crisis is instantaneous and violent. I want to shift our focus to the final major section of the operational data. It details a specific event that occurred on August 8th, 2011.
Flight 103.
Yes, it's the only accident listed in the encyclopedic entry for IrAero, and I want to emphasize right away to you listening, everyone survived, there were 0 fatalities, but the physical mechanics of what happened are terrifying and require a deep breakdown.
It is a critical data point regarding their operational safety and the physical resilience of the equipment they were flying at the time. The incident involves IrAero Flight 103. The aircraft operating this flight was one of those rugged Soviet-era turboprops we discussed extensively earlier.
The Antonov An-24.
Specifically, the airframe registered as RA46561.
Flight 103 was arriving from the city of Chita, a major hub in eastern Siberia. It was scheduled to land at Irkutsk Airport, which serves the city of Blagoveshchensk.
Blagoveshchensk is geographically fascinating and quite challenging. It is located in the Russian Far East, situated directly on the banks of the Amur River.
Right on the border.
Yes, the river forms the international border. If you look across the water from Blagoveshchensk, you are looking directly at the Chinese city of Haihe.
And the weather there.
The geography around the airport is river valley terrain, so it's subject to rapid weather changes, heavy precipitation, and challenging approach paths.
On this specific day, August 8th, 2011, Flight 103 was on its final approach. The aircraft touches down, but it fails to stop. The data describes it simply as a runway excursion. But let's be real about what that term actually means. A runway excursion isn't just a plane rolling gently onto the grass.
No, it's not. A runway overrun is one of the most hazardous events in commercial aviation, primarily because of the sudden transfer of kinetic energy.
Because of the weight and speed.
Exactly. An Antonov An-24 on a landing roll is a machine weighing over 40,000 pounds, traveling at roughly 120 to 140 miles per hour as the wheels touch the tarmac. The pilot relies on wheel brakes, aerodynamic drag from the flaps, and the reverse pitch of the propellers to dissipate that massive kinetic energy before the pavement ends.
But if there is a sudden tailwind or if the runway is contaminated with standing water causing the tires to hydroplane,
Aquaplaning completely negates the wheel brakes.
so that energy isn't dissipated. The end of the runway approaches at a terrifying speed.
And when the aircraft leaves the engineered safety of the paved surface, the physics change instantaneously. Commercial aircraft landing gear are incredibly strong vertically. They're designed to absorb the shock of a hard landing dropping from the sky.
Right.
But they're surprisingly fragile when subjected to lateral or rearward shear forces. When a 40,000-pound aircraft plows into soft mud, deep grass, or uneven terrain at 60 or 70 miles per hour, the landing gear digs in.
And snaps.
The shear force can instantly snap the gear struts, causing the massive metal fuselage to slam directly onto the earth.
Which introduces the risk of the airframe buckling, the wings shearing off, and most terrifyingly, the fuel tanks rupturing. The data notes there were 36 human beings on board that Antonov, 31 passengers and 5 crew members. When that plane departed the pavement at Ignativo, 36 lives were subjected to those extreme physical forces.
The outcome recorded in the data is stark. Out of the 36 people on board, 12 were injured. That brings down to 9 passengers and 3 crew members.
This raises an important question, and it's the core of why this event is so significant. How do you have a catastrophic kinetic event, a 40,000-pound machine, violently tearing itself apart as it plows off a runway, resulting in injuries to a third of the cabin, yet record absolutely 0 fatalities? 22 passengers and 2 crew members essentially walked away.
It is a testament to 3 distinct layers of survivability: structural engineering, cabin safety design, and crew execution.
Let's start with the engineering.
First, we have to look at the airframe itself. The Antonov An-24, despite being an older design, was inherently built for austere environments. We mentioned earlier that it has a high-wing design and ruggedized gear for unpaved runways.
So it's over-engineered.
That inherent over-engineering likely played a massive role. When it hit the rough terrain off the end of the runway at Blagoveshchensk, the fuselage maintained its structural integrity. It didn't crumple like an accordion, which preserved the livable space inside the cabin.
It essentially acted like the crumple zones and roll cage in a modern car.
Very similar concept.
But keeping the metal tube intact is only half the battle. Once the plane comes to a violent, shuddering halt, the clock starts ticking on the most lethal threat in any aviation accident, which is fire.
Fire and smoke inhalation are historically the primary causes of fatalities in survivable impact scenarios. When an aircraft shears its landing gear, the engines often strike the ground, and fuel lines are severed, spraying highly combustible Jet A1 over hot engine components.
So the fact that they survived means what?
The fact that 0 fatalities occurred means the evacuation was executed flawlessly and rapidly.
The data notes 3 of the 5 crew members were injured. These are the flight attendants and pilots who just experienced the exact same violent G-forces and blunt trauma as the passengers.
Yes.
Yet while injured, they had to immediately unbuckle, assess the outside environment for fire through the windows, physically force open heavy emergency doors that might be warped from the impact, deploy the slides or ropes, and aggressively command 31 panicked, disoriented passengers out of the aircraft.
Aviation regulations mandate that an aircraft must be able to be fully evacuated in 90 seconds, using only half of the available exits.
90 seconds is nothing.
In the chaos of a crash, with dust and smoke in the cabin, injured crew members maintaining situational awareness and executing that 90-second drill is the sole reason those 36 people survived.
It's incredible.
It underscores the reality that flight attendants are not just there for passenger comfort. They are highly trained emergency first responders. The Flight 103 data point is brief, but it represents a profound validation of IrAero's emergency training protocols.
It really puts the realities of aviation into perspective. So we have covered a massive operational landscape today in this deep dive.
We really have.
We started by examining IrAero's origins in 1999, rising from the post-Soviet fragmentation as a versatile lifeline in Irkutsk. We mapped their staggering 60-destination network, tracking the brutal thermal cycles of flying aircraft from the permafrost of Yakutsk and Magadan directly into the tropical heat of Vietnam, the Philippines, and the tourist centers of Turkey and China.
We analyzed the severe strategic impact of their ban from European Union airspace, noting how that hard geopolitical boundary forced a complete rerouting of their international ambitions toward the east and south.
We unpacked the baffling paradox of their fleet data. 32 registered aircraft versus a mere 9 active airframes, revealing the hidden struggles of heavy maintenance, potential cannibalization, and the complexities of operating a fragmented fleet of Airbus, Bombardier, and Sukhoi aircraft.
We looked back at their retired, heavy, wide-body Boeings and their legendary fleet of 19 Antonov turboprops.
We broke down the massive corporate gamble of serving as the launch customer for 10 Yakovlev MC-21-300s and the excruciating financial and operational strain of enduring a 6-year delivery delay.
And finally, we dissected the physics and the human element of Flight 103, where 36 people survived a violent runway excursion at Blagoveshchensk.
So, what does this all mean? Look at the sheer volume of friction this company faces. Most businesses struggle to manage standard inflation or a new competitor. IrAero is managing minus 45-degree weather that freezes hydraulic fluid, a closed European continent, a supply chain that forces them to park over 2/3 of their registered fleet, and a flagship aircraft order that is half a decade late. Yet they are still dispatching planes, they are still moving people from the tundra to the tropics. It is an absolute masterclass in operational resilience.
It is resilience born out of geographic necessity. And I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, a purely logistical exercise based on the data we've reviewed.
Okay.
If IrAero's entire current active revenue-generating fleet is indeed just 9 aircraft, and they're actively servicing 60 highly dispersed global destinations across multiple time zones, consider the sheer mathematical density of their flight schedule.
It's hard to even fathom.
Imagine the intricate, non-stop ballet of operations happening behind the scenes. Those 9 airframes must be airborne almost constantly. The moment a Sukhoi Superjet touches down in Irkutsk from Sanya, the engines barely have time to cool. The cabin is cleaned, the fuel's pumped, a new crew steps in, and that exact same plane is pushed back to fly to Moscow or Harbin.
There's no slack in the system.
The margins for error, for a maintenance delay, for a weather hold, for a crew timeout are practically zero. It is a relentless, high-wire act of asset utilization that defies the standard limits of regional aviation.
It is mind-bending. The dispatchers managing those 9 planes must be playing 3D chess every single minute of the day. It makes you deeply appreciate the invisible logistics behind every single flight that manages to push back from the gate. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope we've given you a profound look into the extreme mechanics, economics, and human resilience required to connect the coldest corners of the Earth to the warmest. Until next time, stay curious.